Have you ever wondered where good interior design comes from? Well, I've been digging into that exact question over the past few weeks, and the answer isn't what I expected. It goes way deeper than Pinterest and Instagram. So, in this video, I'm going to introduce you to the design pipeline, the path that good design takes from infancy to your living room. We'll trace exactly how the pipeline works, who's pushing it forward, and how to stay ahead of it so your home always looks and feels its best. So, as we think about this idea of the design pipeline, we can pretty easily trace it back to a hotel lobby in 2009, because that's when the Ace Hotel first opened its doors in New York City. The Ace actually started in Seattle something like 10 years earlier, but the New York location is the one that really broke through. And the lobby was, if you were in New York anywhere between 2009 and maybe 2015, you know the space. Reclaimed wooden communal tables, exposed bulbs, and a Stumptown coffee counter on the ground floor back when Stumptown was still a West Coast thing. And so the whole place just felt like a cabin from the Pacific Northwest that somebody dropped right in Midtown Manhattan. And I distinctly remember it was packed because I actually lived just a few blocks from there for a little while during that period, and there were always people working on laptops in the lobby way before co-working was even a word that anyone used. But here's the interesting thing. Every element in that lobby had its moment within about 5 years of that time. The reclaimed wood tables showed up in every third wave coffee shop in the country, then in WeWorks, then in Airbnb listings, and then finally in people's actual dining rooms. And the exposed bulbs did the same thing, from hotel lobby to coffee shop to your kitchen island. And all of it flowed through the same pipe. Hotel, then commercial, then short-term rental, and then your apartment. But this isn't some weird one-off with the Ace. This pipeline has been running way longer than that. Back in the mid-80s, Ian Schrager, the guy behind Studio 54, opened a small hotel called the Morgans in New York. At that time, most inner-city hotels were massive, on the order of 500 plus rooms. So when the Morgans opened with just 100 rooms and no sign outside, the press didn't know what to call it. But the word that stuck was boutique. And then, about a decade later, Schrager opened the Delano in Miami with all white walls, all white floors, and these enormous white curtains billowing through the lobby. So the whole hotel was basically a blank page. And I know an all-white hotel doesn't sound that wild now, but you have to remember what hotels looked like in 1995. Most of them were full of burgundy and floral bedspreads designed to hide stains. So white wasn't just a color choice, it was confrontational. And it worked so well that it killed itself. Because within a few years, every major hotel chain looked at what Schrager was doing and said, yeah, we need one of those too. So they all launched their own lifestyle sub-brands, and then Schrager himself partnered with Marriott to launch Edition, an ultra high-end version of what he was building with the Delano in the 90s. The original idea got photocopied until it was unrecognizable. And the Delano's all-white palette filtered out the same way the Ace did, into luxury spas, then cafes, and then Airbnbs in every city on Earth. And Kyle Chayka wrote about this phenomenon back in 2016, which he called airspace. The idea that a coffee shop in Toronto now looks identical to one in Tokyo, which looks identical to one in Copenhagen. But if you look a little deeper, you'll see that they all trace back to the same design decisions made in hotels half a decade earlier. But is it possible that this goes way beyond hotels? Because the most complete version of this pipeline that I've ever seen isn't a hotel, it's a members club. And of course, I'm talking about Soho House. The first Soho House opened in London back in the 90s, and the whole idea was to make a space that felt like the best version of someone's apartment. And I remember the first time I stepped into a Soho House. It was in Berlin, and you just kind of sink into the place. There was a pool party on the roof that day, but inside, I remember the vintage lamps and the worn-in furniture, and all of it in this moody, low-lit palette that makes everything feel warm and cozy. But it doesn't feel designed in a theatrical sense. It feels lived in, like someone with great taste just lives there. And that's the trick, because you walk out the door from Soho House and you go back to your own apartment, and you feel kind of embarrassed. Not in a bad way, but in a I need to get my shit together sort of way. And people do exactly that. They go home and try to recreate that same aesthetic, which is why that look migrated from the Soho houses themselves into their members' living rooms within just a few years. Because An entire generation of creatives developed their taste by sitting in a Soho House. And Soho House knows this, which is why in 2016, they launched Soho Home, a furniture and homeware line that literally sells you the sofas and lamps and glassware that you see in the clubs. And it's an extremely lucrative business for them. They don't separate their Soho Home financials anymore, but I know that between 2021 and 2022, their revenue just from Soho Home doubled from £12 million to £24 million, so something is definitely working. And here's how they do it. Soho Home is currently selling this mirror for $2,000 or $1,700 if you're a Soho House member. But in 2 minutes, you can find multiple very similar styles on Etsy for significantly less. And if we were to dig for 5 or 10 minutes more, I'm pretty sure we could find even better prices than these. So the question is, what are you really paying for? Well, you're paying for the association with the club, with the world you want to belong to. And honestly, fair enough. That's what brands do. But it tells you something about how this design pipeline works, because you're still shopping within the taste they built, whether you buy from them or not. And that's the part most brands get backward. Most furniture companies design a product and then spend millions of dollars trying to convince you to want it. But Soho House did the opposite. They made you want it first, years before the product even existed, just by letting you sit in it. And so by the time Soho Home launched, the demand was already there. So they weren't creating desire, they were harvesting it. And sure, Soho House is the most explicit version of this, but the same exact thing is happening across completely different industries, and honestly, some of these surprise me. For example, when did we all decide that a stylish bathroom had to be full of glass amber bottles wrapped in minimalist labels? We didn't. Aesop did. Aesop basically invented what an elevated bathroom is supposed to look like. And even though each of their stores is different, their aesthetic as a whole is instantly recognizable. And now, just about every upscale bathroom renovation includes some version of that. And it works the same way as Soho House. You encounter the Aesop look in a space you admire, like a hotel or the bathroom of a trendy restaurant, and it recalibrates what your own space should feel like. And when you go home, now your bathroom feels wrong. Aesop didn't need to advertise bathroom design, they just needed their bottles to be visible in the right rooms. And then there's Carbone in New York, which really turned things up a notch. Red leather banquettes, tons of brass, mid-century Italian-American glamour. They're committed to the bit. And that same energy is showing up in plenty of dining and living rooms now. Rich color, velvet, and a lot of vintage. But that didn't come from a design blog. It came from hospitality. So we've got a members club, a skincare brand, and an Italian restaurant. 3 different industries from 3 different countries, but all of them have shaped what your home looks like more than any residential designer. And that raises a different question. If this pipeline is running across all these different industries, where does taste actually come from? The obvious answer is Pinterest and Instagram, right? You see a room you like, you save it, and you recreate it in your own space. So that seems like the pipeline. Except it's not. Because if you actually trace those posts back to their origins, you almost never land in someone's apartment. Because Pinterest and Instagram aren't the factory, they're the highway. And someone still has to build the room that gets photographed in the first place. So, is it the big retailers? IKEA, West Elm, CB2? They shape more actual living rooms than any hotel ever will, right? Well, when you look at what they're selling and when they're selling it, they're not leading either. They're translating. For example, West Elm's mid-century modern line is one of their biggest collections. And way back in 2015, it was already everywhere. But boutique hotels and high-end restaurants have been doing that exact same look for years before West Elm figured out how to sell it at a price point that works in a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn. And same story with Boucle. It was all over sofas in hotel lobbies across Scandinavia, while the rest of us were still sitting on gray linen. And by the time you could buy a Boucle chair at H&M Home for $600, the hotels had moved on to something else. So contrary to popular belief, the retailers aren't manufacturing taste either. They're watching what gets tested in hospitality, waiting to see what sticks, and then scaling it. But some retailers who have figured this out are trying to get closer to the source, and Restoration Hardware is probably the best example. In 2015, RH opened a gallery in Chicago where the ground floor wasn't a showroom, it was a restaurant. You'd eat lunch surrounded by RH furniture, and by the time you were done, you'd already decided that you needed the dining table. And then in 2022, they opened an actual hotel in Manhattan. 9 rooms, Tuscan travertine, and a caviar bar in the basement. So a furniture company decided that the best way to sell you a bed was to let you sleep in it first and charge you $1,000 for the privilege. But this pipeline runs into places you'd never think of as having anything to do with interior design, like offices. WeWork basically rebuilt the entire concept of an office around what hotels had figured out decades ago. The warm lighting, the lobby that feels like a living room, the cafe instead of the vending machine, the soft seating instead of rows of cubicles. And as their chief architect, they actually hired Bjarke Ingels, the guy who designed the Lego house in Denmark. And his entire brief was basically make an office feel the way a great hotel lobby feels. And just about every corporate office that's been renovated over the past decade has followed the same playbook. Exposed brick, communal tables, and a high-end coffee bar. So your office doesn't look like an office anymore because someone looked at a hotel and said, yeah, that's how people should feel at work. And then there's hospitals. The Cleveland Clinic has had an in-house art curation team since 2006 with over 7,000 pieces of art now because they believe that the art on the walls impacts how fast you heal. And one of their art curators, Brian Downey, actually came from the 21C Museum Hotel in Nashville. So think about that for a second. A hospital hired an art curator from a hotel. That's the pipeline. And Bumrungrad Hospital in Bangkok, which is the biggest private hospital in Southeast Asia, they brought in a hospitality architecture firm to redesign all their interiors. So that means art in the hallways, warm tones, and believe it or not, soft light. So that's your living room, your office, and even your hospital. All of them got redesigned in the last decade, and all of them lifted their aesthetics directly from hotels. But that leads to another question. Why are these hotels so ahead of the curve? And I think the answer starts with pressure. Because the hotel industry is one of the most competitive industries on the planet, and interior design is one of the few ways that hotels can actually set themselves apart. I mean, think about what a hotel's actually selling. It's a portion of space for a portion of time. If nobody books that room tonight, the revenue is gone. You can't sell Tuesday's room on Wednesday. And there's always another option. 5 hotels within 5 blocks that are all 5 stars. And a company like Marriott has something like 3 dozen different brands, from Fairfield Inn all the way up to the Ritz-Carlton. So that's how crowded this market is. But it's not just that the market's crowded. The stakes are high too. Because when your rooms look great online but feel flat in person, you bleed bookings. Your guests don't come back, and you never find out why. So the market ruthlessly punishes bad design and never explains itself. And that's why luxury hotels renovate every 5 to 7 years. Not because they want to, but because the guest who loved your lobby in 2019 has walked through 15 other newer lobbies since then, and if yours feels even slightly tired, they book somewhere else. And honestly, I think that's a great thing for the rest of us because it means hotels are running a 24/7 R&D lab for residential design. And they're testing materials, lighting, color palettes, all of them under real pressure with real feedback at a pace that no residential project could ever match. Because your living room doesn't deal with any of that. Most living rooms get designed once, if at all, maybe photographed from a couple of angles, and then they just sit there for a decade. Nobody leaves a 1-star review because the proportions are off, and your family doesn't check out because the lighting gave them a headache. But hotels deal with that every single day. Every night, every guest has an opinion, and that pressure has forced them to figure out what actually makes a room work. So, hospitality design decisions don't live on a mood board, they live on a spreadsheet. And they get there first because they can't afford not to. But that certainly doesn't mean mood boards are useless in hospitality. It means that they come with something most of ours don't: structure. So if pressure is the first reason hospitality gets there first, structure is the second. Because hotels have these things called brand books that spell out every detail. What colors are allowed, what materials go where, and how the lighting should feel at different times of day. Restaurants have concept documents. Retail stores have visual merchandising rules, and every serious hospitality business sits down before a single piece of furniture gets ordered and writes out the rules for what's allowed into the space and what isn't. And some of these documents run over 100 pages, which is what allows a hotel chain to hand that document to 50 different architects in 15 different countries, and every property still feels like it belongs to the same family. But your living room doesn't have that. The concept document for most people's homes is a Pinterest board with 250 pins from a dozen different aesthetics, and somehow that's supposed to become one coherent room. And that's one of the reasons so many people struggle with designing their homes. Not because they have bad taste, but because there's no thread tying it all together. And you can see exactly what a brand book does when you look at Hotel Ulysses in Baltimore. It's 116 rooms across 4 completely different color schemes: blush red, mustard, teal blue, and moss green. And it's got this distinct Art Deco energy running through the entire place. So you'd think it should be chaos, but every room follows the same grammar. 4-poster beds with scalloped canopies, hand-beaded lampshades from India, and flamingo-shaped bedside tables. So the color changes, but the motifs and proportions don't. 4 different rooms, same set of rules. That's what makes it work. But the way most people shop for their home is the opposite of that. You see a sofa in a showroom, a rug online, and a lamp on sale, and you think about all of them one by one. So every item gets evaluated in isolation, purchased in isolation, and then it all shows up in the same room and you can't figure out why it doesn't work. But hotels don't buy like that. Every piece gets evaluated against the brand book. And so they're constantly asking, does this lamp follow the same rules as the sofa? Because if not, it doesn't get through the front door. So the lesson isn't that bold interiors don't work. Hotel Ulysses proves they do. The lesson is that getting them right means saying no 80% of the time. Now, if hospitality leads residential by about 5 years, then what hotels are doing right now is a spoiler for what homes are going to look like in the early 2030s. And right now, 3 things are happening at the same time. The first is color, and the money behind it is staggering. In 2024, Hilton paid something like $210 million to buy Graduate Hotels, a chain of pattern-heavy, color-saturated boutiques built around college towns. That same year, Hyatt bought The Standard in a deal worth up to $335 million. And then in 2025, Marriott paid $355 million for Citizen M. So that's 3 of the biggest hotel companies on earth writing 9-figure checks for personality-driven design identities. And those checks weren't for real estate. Marriott can build its own rooms. They were paying for a look. Now, the second is materials. One hotel, Brooklyn Bridge, opened in 2017 with about 200 rooms, and the material list sounds like a salvage yard. Reclaimed wood from the old Coney Island boardwalk, heart pine beams from the Domino's Sugar Factory in Williamsburg, and a whole lot of granite sourced from the same quarry that supplied the actual Brooklyn Bridge. There's nothing polished or pretending to be something it's not. The whole idea was that luxury didn't have to mean pristine, it could just mean honest. And you can trace that idea straight into residential. Hotels and restaurants had lime wash walls for years before they exploded on TikTok. They made the switch from marble to travertine on vanities around 2019, but contractors only started suggesting it around 2023. And hotel lobbies have been using terrazzo floors for years before it showed up on your Pinterest board. So the materials in our homes keep changing, but the pattern is always the same. But to me, this third trend is the most interesting of them all, which is that this entire system is starting to skip steps entirely. Branded residences, which are apartments designed and managed by hotel companies, they grew from about 300 projects worldwide in 2015 to over 900 in 2025. That's 3x growth in just 10 years. And the people who buy them regularly pay a 30% premium over comparable apartments down the street. So people would literally rather have a hotel company design their home than a residential firm, and they'll pay 30% more for the privilege. But what this means is that the lag from hotel to home used to take 5 years and pass through a dozen middlemen. But now, the hotels are just building the apartments themselves. So where does good interior design come from? Well, to put it simply, I think the answer is it comes from rooms you've already been in. Hotels you stayed at, restaurants you ate at, and lobbies you walked through and never thought about again. Because Unless design is your 9 to 5, taste isn't something you invent, it's something you absorb. And the only difference between someone with great taste and everyone else is that they absorbed it earlier. So go sit in those rooms and pay attention to what hotels are doing with their lighting, their materials, and their color. Because the next thing you're going to want in your home is already out there. You just haven't discovered it yet. And just doing that alone will put you ahead of 90% of people. But if you want to go a step further and get an entire system that simplifies every decision and holds your hand as you design a home you love, that's the system I'm building right now. It isn't live yet at the time I'm recording this, but it might be by the time you watch it, so you can get all the details or join the waitlist at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.